Take it in, Kansas City. We are the world champion. You think the Northwest Bearcats know a thing or two about winning? I think so.
Kansas City Chiefs made a statement and won their first playoff game since 1994.
Missouri South, they win football games because they have discipline and great order in their program.
The UCM and Northwest Missouri State rivalry week. The Northwest Missouri State women's soccer team. All 4 goals were scored by Bearcat senior. Just a fan with a microphone who loves his town and his teams. Thompson'sTake.com, where local teams and athletes will always matter. Welcome in to another edition of the Die Hard Sports KC podcast here on the Thompson's Take Facebook page and YouTube channel. My name is Matt Thompson, checking in with you as always. And once again, my good friend Lucas Devine will join me today as we break down and discuss the Kansas City Royals, the boys in blue who had a miserable year last year at 65 and 97. And their dismal year resulted in the termination of longtime general manager Dayton Moore as well as Mike Matheny. And Lucas, before we get into it here, a lot of options for the Kansas City Royals, as we just were discussing before we came on the air, if you will. They've done a lot of things here just in the last few months. They've got a new manager in Matt Quintero, a new pitching coach in Brian Sweeney, and really the only one still in place is Alex Zumwalt, and he'll be in charge of the Royals offense. And they've brought in some young guys. In addition to all those young guys who came up last year, I'd say that's the one good thing that really happened last year. It was a miserable year, but we got to see a lot of young prospects get their feet wet at the big league level, get that cup of coffee, as they say. Guys like, obviously, Bobby Witt Jr., who's an absolute stud, MJ Melendez, Vinny Pasquantino, Drew Waters is another guy that the Royals are very high on that they got from Atlanta, Michael Massey, and also had some pitchers step up last year. Brady Singer really came into his own. And last year, before the season started, they brought back Zach Greinke on a one-year deal. They've also they're going to bring him back once again. So, Lucas, how you doing, sir?
Good. How you doing today, Matt?
Not too bad. Ready to talk about our favorite team here and discuss the future. And I think it's a bright future. You've got a lot of people that have said that we're really still in a rebuilding phase, and I think the Royals have a chance to surprise a lot of people this year.
It's a team with a lot of young talent, like you said, and I feel like in Kansas City we have become, at least the true fans of the Royals have become eternal optimists in a lot of ways. A team that it seems to always have, when you look at the national level, a really good farm system.
Sure.
It's always, the Royals farm system is top 10 always, and sometimes it takes 30 years to actually come to fruition. But I think this team that they're going to put on the field this year will be a giant leap forward as kind of, I think, a goal of 500. It seems to be at least realistic goal for Royals fans this year.
And I thought that last year. I was going around telling everybody before the season started, I said, this is going to be the year you see people really take a big step forward. And I was looking forward to some of the youth coming up, but I really thought last year would be a year where we took a step forward, and it just didn't happen. It was 65 and 97. And Mike Matheny, overall, now Matheny, as all of you know, any true Royals fan will know, took over for Ned Yost after the 2019 season. And then you had the COVID year, which wasn't a good way to start his managing time here in Kansas City. But he went 165 and 219 in those seasons, obviously with the abbreviated COVID year. And I think John Sherman and Royals fans were fed up and ready for a change. And you mentioned the farm system, and all the while Dayton Moore was here. He came in 2006, and they ended up terminating him, obviously, at the end of last season. The Royals were known for their farm system and developing guys. But it only resulted really in that small pocket where we went to the back-to-back World Series. We were competitive really from 2013 to 2017 with that core of Hosmer and Moustakas and Escobar and Danny Duffy and guys of the past like that. Lorenzo Cain, who's going to retire a Royal. I saw that last week. And now, like I said, they're moving on from Matheny, they're moving on from Moore, and J.J. Piccolo's taking the reins. And it's interesting. I remember when it first happened, I was talking to my dad about it, and we said, Moore is rather Piccolo is basically Dayton Moore's protege, right? So it's interesting to think it's kind of the same school of thought there. But the Royals seem to be more into analytics. They hired Matt Quintrero, and they seem to be more into everything analytical these days. And I think Zach Greinke's a big part of that as well. And the scouting department seems to be moving in that direction. I think baseball in general, Major League Baseball, is moving in that direction. But, Lucas, curious to get your thoughts on the new manager and all these changes that the Royals have made, including J.J. Piccolo and Quintrero.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting that was an interesting development at the end of last year. And I think something that came recently, that the sound bits you've been hearing out of spring training are telling. And I think these young guys especially, when they get asked the difference this year, and it seems like they're all very much pointing to, like, everyone's just loose. Mm-hmm. Everyone, the vibe's loose. They're getting to know the new manager, but the new manager, Matt Quintrero, has instilled a loose, kind of atmosphere. And I think that kind of points back to, Mike Matheny, and not so much Dayton Moore per se, but Mike Matheny as a manager who, had his turmoil in St. Louis towards the end of his time there, and took that break from baseball. I think there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, there were reports, right? Sorry, not to cut you off, but yeah.
No, I think I think there's something to that, especially with young guys, new generation of players. So hopefully that becomes kind of that loose atmosphere is what's able to kind of help the growth of these players. With the manager, I think that's probably the most important job, and I think this new generation has a different expectation, has different feelings than the older generations do, as well as, because like they asked George Brett what he thought. He's like, well, I don't notice the difference. Well, really? George Brett's an older school guy, obviously, sure. And so he didn't have such an eye on the atmosphere itself. I'm sure he loved Mike Matheny, but anyway, that's an interesting
George love?
Yeah, I'm sure that's an interesting dynamic inside the clubhouse. Now with JJ, I think being a protege could go two ways, but it seems as if based on his hires and kind of how John Sherman talked about him, he's got some good values from Dayton Moore.
Sure.
But it's definitely his own type. Like you said, analytical.
Yeah.
And I think you can tell that based on his hires, and we'll find out more and more this season because we have a lot of young guys now currently that have kind of placed themselves in the majors, as well as some young guys who you've seen this spring on a tear.
Absolutely.
That are ready to take a step as well. So it'll be interesting to see how he manages the roster, not only coming out of spring training, but during the year as the season progresses. And then obviously I think another big point will be how him and the staff handles pitching. I know we've heard about raid the zone, and it kind of points towards the analytical side is hitting that strike zone.
Throw the ball right down the middle of the plate and let the ball. I mean, that's what they've been saying is throw the ball down the middle, use your movement, and throw strikes, right. Because the Royals had the worst pitching staff in all of baseball last year. And they struggled at times. Obviously, young pitchers are going to come up, and some of them are going to try and overthink it. They're trying to get a little too cute up there, hit the corners, and maybe not trust in their stuff at the highest level of baseball. But I think it'll be, going back to Piccolo, some of that I agree with, the same school of thought, but maybe a little bit more new age thrown into a lot of the similar values that Dayton Moore had when he was recruiting a player or scouting. But then the analytics will be there. And I like what manager Matt Quintrero said, which was, it's there if they want it. They're not forcing their guys to overthink it or look into it, but if the players want to look into analytics, the scouting department, the analytics department is there for them to take advantage of. And I think that goes back to that loose mentality that you're referring to. Guys want to play, I think, for a manager who's going to keep the environment loose and where no one wants to go into a locker room where there's turmoil. And I'm not saying, you and I weren't in the clubhouse, right? So we don't necessarily know, but it did seem like the Royals were playing pretty tight at times last year. So it'll be really interesting to see. They've brought in new guys, not just from a coaching aspect, but new players. And then they've got this core here. Now let's get more into this core because it's very exciting. Excuse me. And right at the top, the guy that everybody's been talking about, he skyrocketed through the system even with the COVID year, Bobby Witt Jr. He hit 254 last year, 20 bombs, 80 RBIs, and 150 games played. And there seems to be some question about his defense, but I think that's mainly because they were bouncing him around between shortstop and third base. And I think shortstop is Bobby Witt's primary position. I know it is, obviously. And they dealt Mondesi. I think they need to just put Bobby Witt right there at shortstop, give Dozier a chance at third. But Bobby Witt Jr., to me, this will be a year where I think he seems to be such a fast learner. He adjusted really well to the big leagues, and I look forward to seeing what he can do this year alongside a guy like MJ Melendez. Now, Melendez only hit 217, but he did have 18 homers and 62 RBIs. He played in 129 games. And then you look at a guy like Drew Waters, who I've already mentioned, we got from the Braves, and Michael Massey, and also Vinny Pasquantino. Now, Pasquantino's a guy I really am intrigued by. All the while we've been hearing about Nick Pratto, and we know about Nick Pratto's great glove over there at first base. The former Little League World Series hero. And we know he can hit. Nick Pratto put up really good numbers in AAA just a few years ago. So we know that he's a guy that can hit and potentially play first base. But then right there is Vinny Pasquantino, who hit 295 with 10 homers and 72 games played, 26 runs batted in. And Vinny's approach, I've heard him in several interviews, he seems to be a guy that just takes it as it comes. He knows that the game is a series of adjustments, and that's rare for a young player. He doesn't seem to overthink things. He seems to go up there, and he's not trying to just crush the ball. He's going to try and hit the ball to all fields and use his power. But I'm very intrigued by not just him. Really, the three that I really like at this point, and I obviously think a lot of Drew Waters, but we didn't see enough of him at this point. He's a big-time prospect, and I hope that he turns out. But I could see Bobby Witt Jr., MJ Melendez, and Vinny Pasquantino really being a solid core three, kind of the Hosmer, Moustakas, and Kane of the future right there. Lucas, any thoughts on those guys before we get into some more acquisitions here?
That's interesting because I think out of those three, obviously, I feel like Vinny was kind of the unknown coming in. I don't know. Like, I think majority of Royals fans, he wasn't a part of a big draft or a name that you've been keeping track of. He kind of just showed up, played well, and earned his way onto the team. And the more you learn about him, and the more you learn about, like you said, his approach, it seems like it just works in the major leagues. I was, his batting average alone is kind of like through 72 games to have 295. It's a very steady, consistent player that I expect he'll just grow. Bobby Witt Jr., I expect he's my favorite player. Want him to be the greatest. He would fit so well next to Patrick Mahomes and the Mount Rushmore of Kansas City athletes. So him, you just keep growing, like you said. If he sticks into a position, can work at Gold Glove caliber defense and really focus on his craft. The bat is there, and that is just he'll just keep growing. He'll keep grinding. He'll keep growing. MJ Melendez kind of average wise tailed off towards the end of last year, but run producer, and that's another player that bounced around a lot between catcher and left field, and they had him in the infield.
Let's talk about that for a second, just on a side note before we move on, because we touched on it before we came on the air. I want to see MJ out in left field. I want to see him working with Rusty Kuntz. I think he can be a great catcher in the future. I just think Salvi's got good years back there, and the Royals are pretty deep. They've got some really good prospects coming up, catching prospects. And when you look at MJ, I think he's a good enough athlete to where he can make that transition. He's got some speed, and if he works with a guy like Rusty Kuntz, who the Royals are really fortunate to have out there, one of the best coaches in all of big league baseball in terms of coaching guys out in the outfield. I was watching a game on Bally Sports Kansas City the other night. Royals and White Sox are playing, and I think it was Jake Eisenberg, one of the new broadcasters who's replacing Steve Physiok, was saying that Rusty Kuntz has worked a lot with Kyle Isbell. Now, you think of Kyle Isbell, you kind of think, okay, fourth outfielder, inconsistent with the bat. But they said something that really surprised me about him. His average jump is 5 feet better, 5 feet faster than the average outfielder in the major leagues. In a game of inches where you're chasing down fly balls, that makes a big difference. And a lot of that is a credit to Rusty Kuntz. And they also brought in a guy that we probably won't touch too much on today, but Jackie Bradley Jr., who you said you really don't see him making the team. However, even he said about Rusty Kuntz, and this is a 10-year Major League veteran in Jackie Bradley Jr., he's learning things from Rusty Kuntz that he hadn't learned throughout his 10-year career. So that's pretty special right there. And I think Melendez could be another player that transitions to the outfield. And we all remember Royals, future Royals Hall of Famer, I'll say. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Alex Gordon was drafted as a third baseman, moved out to left field, and won a ton of Gold Gloves with the Royals before he retired. Again, big credit to Rusty Kuntz. So we know that players can transition with a good coach like that out there. And I think Melendez, the sky's the limit for him offensively. I love the way he uses the whole field as a left-handed hitter who can go to left field with authority. I really enjoy watching him hit, and he can turn on it and turn and burn you.
Yeah.
So, like I said, 62, unbelievably effortless power.
His swing is, it always cracks me up watching him go opposite field because it looks like he just barely swings it and it goes 420 feet. I think that's an interesting topic now because I want to think about this is you talk about catcher. They've got multiple players who are playing well, a lot of depth in the organization at catcher. Obviously, Salvi being at the top, having a few good years left in him. Outfield. Prospects galore in the outfield. And you see them, when we go talk about our lineup here in a little bit, opening day, you have options. And that's just, in terms of like what they're going to do moving forward with 26-man lineup or roster, it's going to be interesting. And I think it's one of the not talked about enough pluses that the Royals have as an organization right now is not only do they have these young players that are playing well, but competition's there. And they know that there is 5 or 6 outfielders in the organization who at any moment prove themselves a couple hot weeks and then your job's gone. And I think that's a underrated aspect of the Royals this year is the competition. And you're like talking about Melendez. He goes to the outfield. That's another outfielder that is there to compete.
Drew Waters comes back from an oblique. I failed to mention that. It was an oblique, right? 4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah. So he'll be out till, he'll get games in AAA, obviously, when he comes back. But, that's another outfielder. And so there's lots of competition. You talk about infield. Competition on the infield. Nicky Lopez. We haven't even talked about him.
He's favorite guy.
He's having a great World Baseball Classic. He's coming off a rough year, which, that's tough. But he's showing up in spring. He's showing up at the World Baseball Classic. Another guy who Dozier's got to worry about. Michael Massey's got to worry about. These are guys that so there's going to be competition at every position all year long to maintain their roster spot. And I think that is going to be valuable, not only this year, but moving forward.
Well, it pushes these guys to come in, like you were saying. If you're not performing and the guy behind you is just raking and coming up and showing up every day, say he's showing up at the ballpark at 1 o'clock, you come in at 2:10, he's already putting his work in, and then he's outperforming you. Competition is absolutely an underrated aspect, even in the big leagues. It can really push guys and to help them to maintain their game and make it even better. And real quick on Nicky Lopez, let's remember that just 2 years ago, he hit 300. And I know the knock on him is that he's a slapper. He's not going to drive in a lot of runs for you, but he will hit you a high average. He's able to lay down a bunt. He does the little things, and he plays the game the right way. He's been one of my favorites for a long time.
Defense is there.
Absolutely there.
Plus. So
I think he should have won a Gold Glove a couple of years ago, or at least been a bigger part of that conversation.
Yeah, he should have. And I was watching, Italy play the other day, and
the flip.
The flip that he diving stop, flip real quick to turn 2 in a huge spot in the game, and you just saw like Mike Piazza, their manager, was just shocked. Like, I mean, he's got the defense, and he's going to push Bobby Witt Jr. He's going to push Michael Massey because if they're kicking the ball around, you might see, now we got to make some changes. So I think
options.
Yeah, competition's going to be key.
For a rebuilding team, we sure seem to have a lot of depth.
Yeah, a lot of depth, and it's been an interesting spring, especially with the World Baseball Classic. You're seeing a lot of young guys playing, and they're still winning. They're still driving in runs. It seems like every game the Royals are on top quick, and they're maintaining that, which I think speaks to the pitching.
Let's go right into it. Yeah, well, it's a big deal because that was our number one weakness last year. The bullpen, the starting rotation, these guys could not throw strikes. I think our lineup, not to get too far ahead of ourselves here, but our lineup really can hold its own. I don't think we're going to have a hard time scoring runs, even with such a youthful group of guys. But the Royals and J.J. Piccolo did make an effort to bring in some new starters and bring back Zach Greinke, which I love Zach Greinke. Obviously, everyone remembers that he was drafted by the Royals. He was a member of the Royals organization from 2002 through 2010 before going to the Brewers and the big trade that brought Lorenzo Cain and Alcides Escobar and among others that really helped to solidify the Royals' core before they went on that big playoff run. But now Zach re-signed last year at the age of 38. He pitched 137 innings with a 3.68 ERA, but his record was 4-9. They just never seemed to score runs when Zach was on the bump last year. But I love the fact that they brought him back even at 39 because over the years, Zach Greinke's lost velocity, Lucas. But he knows how to pitch. He knows how to throw strikes, and he can still get batters out at a very high level. Even with his fastball now, what used to be 95 to 97 is now 88 to 91. 91 probably on the high side.
Yeah.
But they also brought in Jordan Lyles and Ryan Yarborough, and then in the bullpen, Aroldis Chapman. So they've brought in a lot of bullpen arms, some starters, some veterans. And I think, going back to Greinke just real quick, at the age of 39, he can really continue to take these guys under his wing. I know Daniel Lynch and Brady Singer have both discussed just how much Zach Greinke has helped them just by being able to bounce questions off of him, and they've learned a lot. And I've been saying this for 3 years now. I know how bad our pitching was last year, but potentially I think we have a solid rotation if these guys can throw strikes and continue to learn to pitch.
Yeah. Now that brings up a good point. In what will this rotation, what will this core of pitchers that are young, especially the young guys. Older guys, we have, there's data, understanding on how they've pitched in the past. But these young guys that we've been counting on and worrying about every year, what does this new pitching staff do to their growth? Do we see a different side of Brad Keller? He kind of stalled last year.
So far this spring, he's looking pretty good.
Yeah, he's looked great this spring. He stalled last year and got moved to the bullpen. What does the new staff add to these pitchers, and what do we see this year versus last year? Because last year was probably the most disappointing season of pitching, like in terms of the difference from what you were expecting versus what you got.
Absolutely.
Was probably the most disappointing season in a long time in Kansas City, which is saying a lot because they have had bad pitching before.
But it was all the way around. I mean,
but you just assumed it was bad. You knew it was bad. That's just how it was. This year, hopefully expecting it. I'm expecting big things, big leaps forward, strikes to be thrown. New pitch clock's going to do that. 4 strikes, and I'm excited to see what they do.
That's a very good. You mentioned the pitch clock, which is new. One of the new rules that the MLB is implementing this year. And one of the things that I've always heard, now I'm not a baseball player, and I'm the furthest thing from an athlete, Lucas. You know this, as my friend Drew Doherty named me when we were younger. Heart and soul, Matt Thompson, heart and soul, maximum effort, no results. So I'm not an athlete, but everything that I understand about pitching from what I've been told is that when a pitcher is in a good rhythm, he throws strikes. Just you made that great point of it's going to force strikes because they're not dawdling out there. It forces them not to take their time and probably not to overthink things. Okay, throw the ball, get back up on the bump, and it's time to pitch again. So there's a lot of interesting rules. Obviously, there's any thoughts real quick? We won't touch too much on it today, but the pitch clock and then the shift change, the elimination of the shift.
Yeah, I think that example you're talking about of getting in a rhythm, you see the most with Brad Keller. When he gets into a rhythm, he throws he throws 10 seconds. It's like boom, boom. He's just going. He's finding his rhythm. So that'll be interesting to see how the pitchers take that on, because we've seen our fair share of slow pitching that doesn't result in strikes. So
Ian Kennedy.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But then the shift, I think it's good for offense.
Sure.
I don't know if it...
It'll affect the pitching, too. Just ask Zach Greinke.
Right, yeah. It'll affect pitching. But I don't know, just personally, it's a baseball field.
Sure.
I think at the professional level, you should be able to play 9 guys on one side or whatever, 8 guys on one side. And that should be fine because then it forces the hitters to hit. But I understand where they're coming from. A lot of base hits get taken away from pole hitters. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm excited for it. It kind of takes it back to youth, little league. You played your position. So interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see how teams manipulate the rule. I know I've already seen spring training guys standing on the grass and then right as the pitch gets thrown, taking a step up to the dirt. Mm-hmm. Interesting to see the manipulation there. Interesting to see how the pitch clock is enforced. I know it's tightly enforced right now in spring to get guys used to it. How does that change? Do they we'll kind of see an even umpire how that's enforced. So it should be a fun season in that regard too. I know as I think pitch clock's probably the best thing they've done for non-baseball fans.
Thank you for saying that because it almost bothers me because you have all these fans, and we weren't even going to talk about this, but I'm going to jump in on it because it really bothers me. The pitch clock, all these fans that are saying, well, these games are too long. Well, then don't go to the ballpark or change the channel. It never bothered me. I love to go out to the ballpark. I would watch, of course, I'm the kind of dork, and I think you are too, that on a doubleheader, we would watch 18 innings of baseball and just be thrilled. So I think trying to speed the game up, and it's better for some fans. And I think these changes can be positive for the players.
Right.
I don't care how long the game is. So
yeah, I think I'll enjoy the results of the pitch clock. I think what happens because of it offensively and pitchers.
Sure.
And I like the pace being bumped up a tad. I'm kind of riding that fine line. I hate when pitchers take 30 seconds in between 45 seconds, a minute.
You and Denny Matthews both.
And I know non-baseball fans hate that too. It's so slow. I get it. It'll be interesting to see how that changes. And I think, like you said, I could watch a 4.5 hour, 5 hour game going into extra innings, whatever. But the time difference is substantial. You saw the World Baseball Classic games that don't have these rules are going 3.5, close to 4 hours on some of them. And spring training games.
To be fair on the World Baseball Classic, though, there are a lot of player position changes throughout the games, roster depth, and all that. So
right, but even with that, you got spring training games,
2.5 hours.
Yeah, 2.5 hours.
Two and
so
a half
it's
hours.
An interesting indeed. And I think to kind of wrap that into what we're talking about, I think our starting rotation will benefit from a pace that they can kind of rely on. I think Zach Greinke, he's my opening day starter. I'll say it. I just love the consistency, like you said, with his line last year. If he gets the run support, he could be a 10-plus win pitcher. We'll see. He could have been that last year.
Should have been that
last year.
Yeah.
So I think he deserves that. And then
I'm
curious your thought on go with your whole rotation, because I think mine's a little. I'm still up in the air with it.
I'm still a little bit up in the air, but I can tell you that I think the only person who's going to give Greinke a run for his money is Brady Singer. Given how well Brady Singer
100%.
pitched last year, 27 games pitched, a 3.23 ERA, a 10-5 record, and there were times where he was just unhittable. And he's looked really good this spring as well. I think Greinke, you can always rely on that veteran presence. Lord knows he's started several opening days, so it won't be anything new for him. And I will always trust Zach Greinke, as I was talking about earlier. Even with the decline in velocity, he still knows how to pitch, and I'd put him out there just about above anybody else, even at 39 years old. So I won't have a problem if they give him the nod. I also won't be surprised if they give Brady Singer the nod there. And then really for the rotation, I'd say Brady Singer, and I think the Royals really like Jordan Lyles. I could see him and Greinke sneaking in. I could see Brady Singer taking the ball, followed by Zach Greinke. Maybe a guy like Jordan Lyles or Brad Keller. You could kind of flip those guys either way. And then another guy that I've been intrigued with for a long time is Chris Bubich. I think he's got a very high ceiling, and he hasn't performed at this point, and there's probably a lot of people rolling their eyes and saying, Matt, he hasn't performed at all. He walks guys, he can't throw strikes, but I really think he's another guy. And Daniel Lynch, for that matter, is another guy with the big lefty who could really do some damage as he continues to develop. So I'm really not sure on my 1 through 5 at this point, just where everybody's going to land. And I won't be surprised to see the Royals run some guys out there and adjust the rotation as it needs to be adjusted. So real quick, do you have anything to add on the starting rotation?
I just think you like all those names you pointed out. It'll be interesting to see how they handle it. Carlos Hernandez is still trying. Jackson Coar, all those guys. It'll be interesting to see what the lineup or rotation is, how many pitchers they put in the rotation, what they do with it throughout the season, how solidified it is. I think it'll be an interesting kind of manipulation of the starting rotation by this new pitching staff.
Now let's talk about Carlos Hernandez real quick. He was a guy that came up a few years ago and really looked like he could be a dominant starter. And then last year just completely fell off and ended up spending the majority of the year in the minor leagues. Now in spring, the Royals have been running him out there, and the thought is that he could be a back end of the bullpen guy. He throws gas. I'm talking 99 miles an hour back into the bullpen guy. I like them putting him there and letting maybe a guy like Aroldis Chapman could take him under his wing and help him. And then, you got Scott Barlow, Taylor Clark.
Yeah, the names are there, the talent's there, so we'll see how it all comes together this season.
It's going to be a fun year, and we're going to get ready to wrap up here in just a few minutes. A couple more topics that we wanted to hit here on the Thompson's Take Die Hard Sports KC Podcast Royals Preview 2023, our starting lineup. Lucas, I'll let you take that one real quick.
All right, let's just start.
Not in any specific... subject to change.
Yeah, subject
absolutely.
to change, but my initial thoughts... go quickly here. Bobby Witt Jr. lead off. I like his speed, athleticism. I could be talked out of it, but I like just having that at the top. Followed by Massey. I think he has potential to be a great two-hole. He could be a leadoff depending on how his average comes up. But enjoy him at second.
Wild card Nicky Lopez?
Wild card Nicky Lopez, depending on how the positions and roster shakes. I think 3 is a perfect spot for Vinny Pasquantino. You got Salvi behind him, and I think that's a great spot for him with his consistency, with average, but also his power. Salvi, like I said, 4-hole, clean up. He's the power. He is. 5, I think an interesting name we haven't talked about, but I think people will see Franmil Reyes power hitter, trying to have a comeback season. Everyone knows the Royals love a good comeback and trade player.
Milky Cabrera.
I expect him to
Jeremy
not be on the
Guthrie.
team in August. I expect him to play well, though.
What if we're in contention? Trade him for some depth at the back of the pen?
It'll be, if we're in contention, we'll see. But I would expect if they were anywhere near 500, he'll be a trade piece.
Real quick on Franmil Reyes, just sorry to cut you off.
No.
But let's remember, I don't know how many people know. I mean, he was in the division for the Cleveland Guardians, and just a few years ago, had a down year last year. But in 21, 30 homers, 85 RBIs, and that was with some substantial time missed due to injury.
Yeah.
So he's a guy that I think fans will like. He was on there. They interviewed him on Bally Sports a couple days ago, and he seems like a really likable guy.
Right, and they his agent basically they had a few teams, and he picked the Royals because he was confident that he could revitalize his career here, and we'll see how it goes. We'll see. He's an interesting piece for the season, depending on how the Royals do, where he ends up in July. But maybe he'll still be here, and we'll have a season of our lives. Who knows? Then we go 6, MJ Melendez. I like him in the back half, depending on how he hits to start off the season. Dozier is kind of like his last opportunity to kind of prove that he can be a solid major league player, everyday player. Hopefully he gets that chance. I don't know if he will, but if he does, like him there as well. 8, Nick Prado, assuming he's starting first base. See if he can get back on the right track with a full season. And then rounding it out with our outfielder of choice. You could go Kyle Isbell, Nate Eaton, or Edward Alvarez, depending on who's out there. I think opening day,
I'm leaning
Kyle Isbell just because he has experience and he's having a good spring. So, but it'll be interesting to see how, and I think that's a perfect wraparound to Bobby Witt Jr.
It is, and I think whatever they do, they're going to have speed in the 9-hole, speed at the top, speed at the bottom.
Yeah.
And I do think I know that you don't think that Jackie Bradley Jr. is going to be on the opening day roster, but in a classic Royals move, I could see them taking Gold Glove defense and just waiting on Drew Waters to get back and hoping that Jackie Bradley Jr. can deliver with the bat.
I think that's a Dayton Moore move. I think there'll be a little bit more pressure coming down from the top.
It's a new sheriff in town.
If he makes the opening day roster, I'd be shocked. But who knows? Maybe he'll have opportunities this spring in the next couple weeks here to prove himself as a option. And he'll definitely be, if he stays on the team, he'll be a great option as a fourth. But we'll see. Maybe he'll turn some heads. And, outfield, like I said, it's that position of depth, especially in spring training. When you add guys like Franmil Reyes, Jackie Bradley Jr., all that does is add veteran depth. So who knows what happens. Very curious to see the opening 26.
I am as well. And just a few more things here. We'll wrap this up very quickly. Just a few more topics we wanted to touch on. And we'll go quickly here. Lucas, your thoughts on the downtown stadium as plans continue to develop. You know how I feel about it. I'll let you start, and then I'll rant and try and keep it under 4 hours.
Yeah, no, downtown stadium's going to happen, and now it's just a matter of where, I would say. And I think that part's interesting. I hope it stays in Jackson County, personally. We'll see. I'm a proponent of it at this point. I think it's worthy of doing. I think it'll bring in eyes. It'll bring in opportunities. It'll bring in money. If it gets used in the right way, who knows? But I think I like downtown stadiums. It's going to happen at this point.
I hope it doesn't.
It will. We're at a point where it will happen. So it's like... since it's kind of pretty much locked in, I would say I'm for it if they do it the right way. We'll see. I know they've been talking about up north of the river in the North Kansas City. Don't know how much I like it. I like the location a little bit, depending on how they handle that. But we'll see. They've said there's 5 options on the table still, and that's just kind of we're gonna have to wait and see. And
would you like to know what my 6th option is?
Kaufman.
Well,
as is.
Let me just get started here, and I'll bear in mind that we're going to try and wrap this up within the hour. But you have a great stadium. It was just built in 1973. They hosted the All-Star Game. They've remodeled it as recently as like 2008 or 9. So when John Sherman says that building a new stadium will be the cheapest option as opposed to remodeling what we currently have, I really don't see how that works. I'd challenge that. I'd like to see those numbers a little bit, take a closer look at those numbers. But here's the biggest issue with the downtown stadium that I have. From a business standpoint, Lucas, I see where you're coming from. Bars and bringing in money and people going downtown and enjoying it. And I'm sure when it's all said and done, it'll be a beautiful stadium. I don't question that. But when the game gets out, and it might be a shorter game due to the pitch clock, but when we're all sitting in a parking garage for 2.5 hours and staring at the pillars and playing the license plate game, I'm going to let people say, Matt, you know what, you were right. Because we have an abundance of parking in a beautiful stadium as it is, and that is where I will leave it on the downtown stadium.
Yeah, that one is just time will tell, and even with your concerns, definitely valid. We'll see if they have to address it, so we'll see if it gets addressed correctly. We'll see.
All righty, Lucas. Well, this is Matt Thompson and Lucas Devine here on the Thompson's Take Facebook page and YouTube channel. Oh, one last note here on our outline. For all Royals fans that are watching on Bally Sports Kansas City or listening on the radio, some new broadcasters were brought on last week, some guys that you will probably recognize. Jake Eisenberg, who called games for the Omaha Storm Chasers, will now be calling games on Bally Sports Kansas City, I think primarily on 610 Sports Radio, the Royals radio network.
Yeah, he's a radio guy.
Alongside Steve Stewart. And then Mike Sweeney, Royals Hall of Famer Mike Sweeney, and Jeremy Guthrie, who is a big part of the Royals championship teams between 13 and 15 or so. He will also be, I think, on Bally Sports Kansas City, both on the pre- and post-game show and then possibly in the booth sometimes with Ryan and Hud. So some exciting news there. Excited to listen to those guys, as well as your old favorites like Denny Matthews and Steve Stewart. With that, I think we're all ready to wrap it up. Very excited for the upcoming Royals season. Lucas, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Looking forward to it. Lots of opportunity, lots of change, and we'll see how it goes. Excited to watch it, and appreciate you having me, Matt.
Yes, sir. Go Royals. This is Matt Thompson here on the Thompson's Take Facebook page and YouTube channel with Lucas Devine. We'll see you next time, guys.